Military interventions, advantages and disadvantages. In the 20th century, many military interventions have been made in sovereign states. They have been aimed at stopping or reducing violence within particular countries. The critics of this strategy argue that such an approach can become an instrument of coercion. In their opinion, the primary purpose of this interference is to impose one's geopolitical interests upon another country. Furthermore, this form of interference is more likely to endanger the lives of many innocent people. However, at the same time, this intrusion can also save millions of people who dictatorial governments can victimize. Moreover, in many cases, there are ethnic conflicts within societies. Under such circumstances, it is vital to stop different ethnic groups from entering into a military confrontation with one another. These are the main issues that should be discussed. First of all, humanitarian intervention is essential when there is a risk of violence that is based on national, religious, or ethnic prejudice. For instance, one can mention such a country as Rwanda, in which Hutu political leaders provoked the ethnic genocide of the Tutsi people. One should bear in mind that international organizations were aware of these threats, but unfortunately, no action was taken. Similarly, it is possible to mention the ethnic hostilities in the former Yugoslavia. The deployment of peacekeepers can avert a disaster such as genocide. Overall, this argument is based on the premises of the just war theory, which postulates that military action should be justified when it is necessary to stop injustice. Additionally, it is possible that in the course of this ethnic conflict, a dictatorial and totalitarian government can come into power. In the long term, this government can become an enemy of the United States and its allies. This is one of the main threats that should be taken into account. This is another rationale for implementing a military intervention. The argument is fundamental when one speaks about the international intervention in the Korean War, which broke out in 1950. In turn, contemporary Southern Korea is one of the most advanced countries in the world, and it is a long-term ally of the United States. Therefore, humanitarian intervention can be critical for protecting a country's geopolitical interests and national security. Indeed, one can also offer arguments against this intrusion. In particular, it is possible to say that this military action can be motivated primarily by political or economic interests rather than the intention to save innocent people. For instance, the critics of this strategy point out that this military intrusion is more likely to boost the geopolitical aims of economically and militarily advanced countries. This is one of the main pitfalls that should be avoided. In particular, one should mention the war in Iraq. This case is critical because it shows that sometimes political leaders may not have accurate information. One should bear in mind that the United States troops could not find weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, even though the existence of these weapons was one of the pretexts for the invasion of this country. So, these objections can be used by the critics of humanitarian intervention. Finally, it is essential to mention that a military intervention can result in the deaths of many American citizens. For instance, the invasion of Iraq took the lives of more than 4,400 American soldiers. Therefore, the critics of military intervention can say that any geopolitical or economic interests cannot justify the deaths. Additionally, one should not forget that this humanitarian intervention resulted in the deaths of approximately 50,000 Iraqi civilians. In other words, the losses caused by the humanitarian intervention turned out to be even more disastrous than the dictatorial regime of Saddam Hussein. Overall, these arguments should be kept in mind by political leaders who decide to start a humanitarian intervention. It is possible to provide several examples of successful and unsuccessful military interventions. For example, one can speak about the operation of NATO forces in Kosovo. This intrusion helped to stop the violence against Albanians. The government of Slobodan Milosevic staged this violence. In turn, the international community wanted to stop this ethnic cleansing. Moreover, modern Balkan states have begun to recover economically and politically. They have become more integrated into the European community. This is one of the possible outcomes that can be identified. As has been said before, modern South Korea is also the result of a humanitarian intervention. In contrast, there are examples of failed operations. Much attention should be paid to the situation in modern Iraq. Indeed, the United States troops succeeded in destroying the regime of Saddam Hussein. However, this country is still torn apart by ethnic and religious hostilities. Similarly, one should not forget about the Gulf War, which also resulted in heavy losses. At this point, one cannot tell when this country can cope with the legacies of a totalitarian regime and continuous war. This is why political leaders should be cautious while launching any form of intervention. Furthermore, the failure of these humanitarian interventions can be partly explained by the fact that foreign military planners and politicians lacked an understanding of local culture and the tensions existing in Iraqi society. However, one should mention that inaction results can also be catastrophic. One of the most notorious cases is the Rwandan genocide, which took place in 1994. The United Nations peacekeepers entered the territory of the country when the violence against the Tutsi people was already rampant. As a result, they could not protect the victims of the genocide. Similarly, one should not forget the failure to prevent the Holocaust. This is another example that political leaders should not disregard. This discussion suggests that military intervention can lead to different outcomes. Sometimes, this strategy can restore peace within a particular country. More important, it can eventually contribute to economic and political stability in the region. However, at the same time, this military intrusion can only increase hostilities. Therefore, military and political leaders must ensure that the actions are based on verified information. They should use force only when there is a risk of imminent danger. Nonetheless, a humanitarian intervention can still be a valid strategy when it is necessary to avert an ethnic conflict. This is one of the main arguments that can be put forward.